My name is Owen, and this happened during my first year of college at a mid-sized state school in upstate New York. I want to give some context about this setup before I get into it because it matters for understanding how trapped I felt during all of this. The dorm was one of those older buildings on campus, the kind that smells like radiator heat and carpet that's been shampooed too many times. Double rooms, shared floor bathrooms, a common lounge at the end of each hallway with a TV nobody watched. My room was on the 4th floor, room 412, and I remember the number because I thought about it constantly during those first few weeks, specifically about how long I was going to have to keep living there. My roommate's name was Fletcher. I didn't know anything about him before I arrived. The school had sent me his name and email in July, and I'd reached out once to say hi and figure out who was bringing what. He responded 3 weeks later with a single line that said he didn't have any appliances. That was it. No hey, no introduction, nothing. I figured he was just a quiet guy who didn't love small talk over email. I was wrong about what kind of quiet he was. He arrived the afternoon of move-in day, after I'd already been there for a few hours. My parents had just left. I heard the door and turned around expecting the normal awkward first hello, and what I got instead was this tall, pale kid with a large duffel bag who walked straight to his side of the room without looking at me, set down the bag, and sat on the edge of his bare mattress facing the wall. He stayed like that for about 3 minutes. Then he turned around, looked at me, and said, "So you're Owen." Not hi, not nice to meet you. Just a statement of fact, like he'd already known. I said yeah, and stuck out my hand. He looked at it for a second and then shook it, no grip, no warmth. He told me his name was Fletcher. I asked him where he was from. He said Ohio. I asked what he was studying. He said he hadn't decided. I asked if he wanted to come with me to dinner in the dining hall. He said no. That was the longest conversation we had for the first 4 days. I spent most of that first week figuring out campus, meeting people on my floor, going to orientation events. Fletcher was always in the room when I left and always in the room when I got back. I never saw him eat. I never saw him use the bathroom. I never saw him leave the building. He sat on his bed on his laptop with the screen tilted just far enough away that I couldn't see what was on it. Once I noticed he wasn't wearing headphones but wasn't making any sound, and when I looked over he was just staring at the wall. I told myself it was none of my business. Some people are extreme introverts. Some people have anxiety. Some people need time to adjust. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because I was 18 and I wanted to believe in reasonable explanations. The first night something actually alarmed me was about 10 days in. I'd stayed late in the lounge talking with a few guys from down the hall. Got back to the room around 1 a.m., quiet enough that I didn't want to turn on the overhead light. I changed in the dark and got into bed. I fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up at some point in the night and the room felt different. I can't explain that better than that. The quality of the air felt changed, like something in the room had shifted while I slept. I opened my eyes and the blinds were open. They hadn't been open when I went to sleep. The moonlight was coming in and making everything visible. Fletcher was sitting on the edge of his bed facing me. Not lying down, not on his laptop. Sitting upright on the side of his bed closest to mine, facing directly toward me. His hands were in his lap. He wasn't moving. I could see his face clearly in the moonlight and there was no expression on it at all. I sat up and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Sorry," in a whisper, then laid back down. Within a minute his breathing was even and slow like he was asleep. I lay there in the dark for a long time. The next morning I asked him about it. He said he'd gotten up to close the blinds because the light was bothering him and had sat down for a minute because he felt dizzy. It was a perfect explanation. It covered everything. I still didn't believe it. Over the next week I started noticing other things. Small things that I kept filing away and telling myself meant nothing. My laptop would be at a slightly different angle than I'd left it. My desk drawer would be not quite fully closed. Once I came back to find my backpack had been moved from the floor to my desk chair, and when I asked Fletcher about it he said he hadn't touched it. Then one night I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of a zipper. I turned on my lamp. Fletcher was on the floor next to my bed going through my bag. He looked up at me and said, "I think you have one of my chargers by mistake." His voice was completely calm. Like this was a normal explanation for being on the floor next to my bag in the dark at 2 in the morning. I told him to get out of my stuff. He stood up, said sorry, and got back into bed. I submitted a room reassignment request the next morning. The housing office told me it would take up to 2 weeks. I spent those 2 weeks sleeping with my bag under my covers. The reassignment came through on a Thursday. I moved 3 floors down to room 116 that afternoon. I didn't tell Fletcher I was moving, I just moved while he was gone, which was the first time in weeks I'd seen him leave the building. I got my new room set up, introduced myself to my new roommate, and went to dinner feeling like I'd been released from something. That night, at 1:30 a.m., I heard something outside my door. A sound I recognized immediately. Not knocking, something quieter. A faint, irregular clicking at the door handle. The kind of sound a lock makes when someone is working it from outside. Testing it. I looked through the peephole. He was there. Standing in the hallway looking down at the handle, his hand on it, trying to turn it. I called campus security from my phone. They arrived in 4 minutes. When they opened the door, he was still there. He'd been there the whole time. They took him to the campus police office and I gave a statement about the pattern of behavior going back to the first week, the watching, the bag, the moving of my things. Fletcher was suspended pending a conduct review. I found out later from someone on my original floor that he'd done something similar to a student at his high school the year before. I don't know the details. I didn't want them. My new roommate, for what it's worth, was completely normal. We barely talked, but in a good way, the way where 2 people just coexist without incident and both appreciate it. I slept fine after that. But I still checked the door handle at night. It became a habit sometime during those 2 weeks in room 412 and it never stopped. I push on it after I lock it just to feel the resistance. I don't decide to do it. My hand just does it. My name is Mia and I was a junior at a fairly competitive university in Northern California when this happened. I need to give you some context about the environment first because it shaped how easy it was to be fooled. My school had this particular culture around professional development that I'd never experienced before. Everyone was building their LinkedIn profiles freshman year. Everyone was applying for internships in February of sophomore year. Career fairs were packed events where students dressed up and practiced their pitches to each other in the dining hall the night before. The pressure to be doing something impressive every summer was ambient and constant and exhausting. I was not immune to it. I was studying business with a concentration in finance. My LinkedIn was carefully maintained. I had a summary, endorsements, a photo where I looked professional but approachable. I'd done one internship the previous summer at a small accounting firm and it was fine, but I wanted something bigger, something I could point to. So when a connection request came in from a recruiter at a firm I didn't recognize, I accepted it. The message that followed was detailed and specific. It referenced things from my profile in a way that felt tailored rather than copied. The firm was described as a boutique investment group with offices in the Bay Area. The opportunity was a summer analyst position. The recruiter's name was Armin Slawinski. I read the message 4 times before I responded. It had everything a legitimate outreach looked like. I responded the next morning. The correspondence moved quickly. Within 2 days I had an interview scheduled. It was over email, no phone call, no video call, just scheduling back and forth via message. I told myself that was normal for an initial screen. The interview location was a coffee shop in Oakland, about 25 minutes from campus. Then I thought about more. Why not on campus, or in their office, or anywhere closer? But the address looked normal when I searched it. Busy street, commercial area. I convinced myself it was fine. I told my friend Riley about it the day before. She was immediately skeptical in a way I wasn't. She asked if I'd looked up the firm independently, not just from the LinkedIn profile. I hadn't. She looked it up with me and we found almost nothing, a bare website with a logo and a single page of vague language about investment philosophy, no staff directory, no physical address listed. I told myself lots of boutique firms kept a low profile. Riley looked at me like she didn't believe I believed that. She offered to drive me. I said yes. The next afternoon she dropped me off a block from the location. I told her to wait. She pulled out a book, which meant she wasn't planning to leave regardless. I walked to the address and stopped. It was a construction site. A full block demolition, fencing up, no coffee shop, no building. The surrounding area was all closed or commercial, no foot traffic, no public spaces. I double-checked the address on my phone. This was it. Before I could call Riley, someone said my name from behind me. I turned around and he was already close. Tall, well-dressed, dark suit, older than I'd expected, maybe late 40s. He was standing next to a matte black car, one of those that signals money in a way that's meant to be noticed. He extended his hand and introduced himself as Armin. He seemed unsurprised by the construction, said he'd been given the wrong address, apologized with the practiced calm of someone who apologized professionally. He suggested we find somewhere else to talk and motioned toward the car. I said sure and walked around to the passenger side. I don't know exactly what made me look. Maybe something in the way he'd said it. Maybe something about the silence when I walked around the back of the car. But I looked through the rear window as I passed it. There was a man lying flat in the back seat. His face was turned away from me. He was holding something long and metal. I couldn't tell what it was exactly, but I could tell it was the wrong shape for anything normal. He wasn't asleep. He was still in the specific way that someone is still when they're waiting. I kept walking. Past the passenger door. Past the front of the car. I didn't run until I hit the corner and then I ran as hard as I have ever run in my life. I heard Armin call my name behind me. Then I heard the car start. I didn't look back. I turned down a side street, then another, trying to find anything, people, open buildings, anything. I found a fire escape on the side of a building and I climbed it without stopping. Second floor, then third. The car couldn't follow me up there. I pressed myself against the wall and looked down. The car was on the street below. It sat there for what felt like a very long time. Then it pulled away. I called Riley from the fire escape. I told her what happened and where I was. She found me 20 minutes later. I was still shaking when I got in the car. We went to the campus police office that evening. I gave them the name, the messages, a screenshot of the LinkedIn profile which had already been deleted. The car description. The partial plate I'd caught as it drove away. I don't know what came of the investigation. Nothing was ever communicated back to me directly. I deleted my LinkedIn that night. I know that's not a reasonable response to the situation. A LinkedIn profile isn't what put me in danger. But I rebuilt it from scratch 3 months later and I was much more careful about what I included. I turned off the setting that let people outside my network contact me. Riley still brings it up sometimes. She says if she dropped me off and driven away like I asked, she wouldn't have been close enough to find me when I called. She's not wrong. I finished my degree and got a job through a campus recruiting event, one of those packed career fairs I used to find exhausting. I stood in line for 45 minutes to talk to a recruiter for 8 minutes. It was exactly as unglamorous as that sounds. I've never been so grateful for something boring in my life. My name is Nate and this happened during my freshman year of college, Halloween weekend, at a large state school in the Midwest. I want to say up front that what happened to me was partly my fault. Not in the way where I deserved what happened, I didn't, but I made a series of decisions that night that a sober, more experienced version of myself wouldn't have made, and I think being honest about that is part of telling the story correctly. It was the Saturday of Halloween weekend. My school took Halloween seriously enough that it was effectively a multi-day event, with parties Thursday through Sunday and a kind of collective amnesia on Monday where everyone came to class looking like they'd survived something. My friend group was mostly older guys I'd met through my floor advisor's older brother, which meant I was frequently the youngest person in whatever room I was in, which meant I drank more than I should have trying to keep up. We'd been to 2 parties already by the time we ended up at the frat house on the east side of campus. By this point I was more drunk than I'd been since I'd gotten to college, which was notable because I'd only been there for 2 months. I don't know whose idea it was to leave. I think the party got broken up by campus security and everyone scattered. My friends and I got separated in the crowd outside. I had my phone. I tried calling but couldn't hear anything over the noise. I texted but no one responded immediately. I was standing on a street I didn't recognize well, in a part of campus I hadn't spent much time in, and it was cold. I think it was in the mid-30s, which I hadn't dressed for because I'd been inside for 3 hours. I started walking in what I thought was the direction of my dorm. After about 10 minutes I realized I wasn't anywhere familiar. There were fewer people around now. The street lights were inconsistent, some blocks lit and some not. I was getting colder and the alcohol was making it harder to navigate by logic. I saw a building ahead that looked like it might be one of the academic buildings near the East Quad, big, brick, institutional looking. The kind of building that's always unlocked during the week. I figured I'd step inside, warm up, wait for my phone to get a response, get my bearings. The door opened when I pulled it, so I went in. It was dark inside. Not pitch dark, there were exit signs above the doors giving off that red-orange glow that's just enough to see the shapes of things without seeing them clearly. It smelled like metal and something else I couldn't name. Not cleaning products. Something older than that. I stood in the entrance for a minute and pulled out my phone. No service. I moved deeper in looking for a signal. The floor was concrete, bare. The walls had the look of a space that hadn't been used in a while. No bulletin boards, no signs, no anything. Just industrial surfaces and that particular silence that empty large spaces have. I found a room off the main corridor and pushed the door open. The light was different in there. Red. Low, from some kind of utility lighting on the far wall. There was a buzzing noise, machinery somewhere behind the walls. And in the center of the room, hanging from the ceiling, were chains. Long ones, heavy ones, the industrial kind. They were hanging still in the motionless air. In the corners of the room were shapes I couldn't fully make out, equipment of some kind, covered in what might have been tarps. There was steam coming from a pipe along the far wall, low and slow, catching the red light. I stood in the doorway and processed what I was looking at. It was clearly some kind of utility or mechanical room. The building probably had industrial infrastructure on this floor, pumps or HVAC systems or something. But the red light and the steam and the chains added up to something that my brain couldn't make feel normal, not at that hour, not in that state. I turned to go back and tried the door. It was locked. Not stuck, not jammed, locked. The handle moved but wouldn't release. I didn't understand how I'd gotten in if it could lock from inside like that. I tried it again. Still locked. I wasn't panicking yet, not fully. I went back through the red room and tried the far door, also locked. I went back to the corridor and tried the other doors. All of them were locked. I went back to the entrance. Locked. My phone had no signal. I tried walking to different parts of the building to find one and couldn't. I went upstairs thinking there might be a window I could signal from. The second floor was the same, dark, empty, industrial, no working lights except the exits. I moved from room to room. Every door I tried to open was locked. I was back on the first floor when I heard it. A door slamming, somewhere below me. Then footsteps. Not from the hallway, from beneath the floor. The building had a basement. The footsteps moved. I tracked them by sound through the ceiling above me. They were walking, not running, but they were walking toward the stairwell. I heard a door open somewhere behind me. Then more footsteps, closer this time. I don't know how to describe what the kind of fear feels like except to say that it bypasses your brain entirely. I wasn't thinking. I was just moving. I went to the nearest exterior wall and found a window. The latch was old, the kind that slides sideways. I forced it open. Cold air came in. I looked out. There was a drop, maybe 10 feet to the ground below, which was concrete on one side and a row of recycling bins on the other. I heard the footsteps on the stairs now, heavy and close. I went through the window. I hit the recycling bins and went over them. The impact took the wind out of me completely. I was on my back on the concrete and couldn't breathe for what felt like a long time but was probably 5 seconds. When I got up, I didn't look at the window. I ran for the tree line on the far side of the building and got into the shadow and looked back. There was a figure in the window. Not hanging out of it, just standing there, looking out. Looking for where I'd gone. I couldn't see a face, just a shape in the dark against the red emergency light behind them. I stayed in the shadow and moved along the tree line until I was out of the sight line of the window. Then I ran. I found my dorm by following a street I eventually recognized. My friends were already back, 2 of them were in the common room, and when they saw me they both stood up at the same time. I had cuts on my hands from the recycling bins and I was shaking hard enough that one of them made me sit down. I told them what happened. The next day we tried to find the building and I couldn't locate it with certainty. The east side of campus has several similar-looking brick buildings and they all blur together when you're sober and stressed and trying to remember details from a night you were drunk. We asked the campus police and they confirmed there were several decommissioned buildings on that end of campus that were locked and fenced but had been known to have entry points that hadn't been properly sealed. When I asked them who might have been inside, they said they didn't know. Maintenance workers sometimes did overnight checks. Sometimes transient people found their way into those buildings and stayed there. Sometimes, they said. I've been back to that part of campus many times since then. I've never been able to identify the specific building with confidence. I know what it felt like from the inside and I know what the window looked like from outside, but the exteriors all look the same in daylight. Whoever was in that building knew how to get in. And they knew where the exits were. The fact that they stood at the window looking for me instead of coming after me is the only reason I can think of why nothing worse happened. I don't know if they saw where I went. I don't know if they knew what I looked like. I finished my freshman year at that school and transferred the following year for unrelated reasons. I've told myself many times that the transfer was unrelated. I'm not entirely sure I believe that. If these stayed with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next ones are already waiting.